Time on building the Exocet. It's time to install the clutch. So now that I have my engine block done and ready to go, next step is installing the clutch before I mate the transmission to it. What I have here is I have the Flyin Miata Happy Meal, basically stage 1 clutch, pressure plate, and then I got the lightweight flywheel for the 1.8. So basically this video I'm just going to show attaching it onto the motor, as well as putting in the throw-up bearing on the transmission side and mating the transmission to the block. Here is basically on our flywheel. We're going to want to clean off all the friction surfaces, get any grease and oils and residues. There's quite a bit of protectant film on this. I'm going to take a little brake clean and wipe this thing down real good, get all this grease and residue off of this, as well as off of the pressure plate. It is basically taking your pilot bearing and getting it inserted and pressed into the flywheel here. What you want to do is you want to take a socket, in this case a 25 millimeter socket is a perfect fit to get onto this outer race of the bearing, and basically tap that in until it's flush in the flywheel surface. Then you're going to insert your flywheel onto your crank shaft as shown. Basically these bolt holes all line up with the bolt holes on the crankshaft. Then you're going to take a little blue Loctite to the bolts. Before inserting them in, and you'll torque them down to about 71 to 75 foot-pounds according to the directions. Already done this about 10 times, but just one real quick final cleaning of the flywheel surface here, just to ensure that all the oils and greases are off of it. I know they are. I don't want to pull this thing back apart right away, so I'm gonna make sure I get all that off. Get that ready. Then the next step is basically installing the clutch onto the flywheel, and for that we'll use the alignment tool. Let me find it first because I forgot to place it over here. So here's your alignment tool. Basically the purpose of this is so that you can make sure your clutch plate is inserted correctly while installing your pressure plate. Now there are alignment tabs all over while you're installing this to make sure you position it properly. Okay. Everything went on good there. Next step is you want to keep this tool on, and then you want to start inserting your bolts for your pressure plate. I'm going to make sure of, while doing this, since the pressure plate is spring-loaded, you do not want to tighten one bolt all the way down at once. You want to make sure I guess the best way I can think of explaining it is similar to how you would tighten a wheel on your car. You want to ensure that you're going in a rotating pattern, basically from one side and then across to the other side, because you don't want to apply uneven pressure to it while tightening. So I'm going to be doing this several times until I see basically the lip over here, the pressure plate contacting the flywheel. Start down here again. And these are a torque setting of I think it's 14 to 18 pounds. I'm going to do a final torque of 17 pounds. But I'm going to torque it in a random order too. I'm not going to go up to full torque at once. I'm going to basically get all these bolts snugged up nice to where I would have to start using a decent amount of pressure and start torquing. I'm basically going to get them to that point here with my ratchet. And I'm at that point now. Now I'm going to go to a 13 foot-pound torque and start torquing in a random pattern. One, go to the other end. Three. Four. Five. This is the last one. Yep. And 6. So now I will go up to an 18 foot-pound torque setting. And 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. Just double checking. I know you're never supposed to really, they say, torque things twice, but I just want to make sure that I got all these at the correct torque setting. Okay, so now the flywheel is installed. Excuse me, the pressure plate and clutch are installed onto the flywheel. And just double checking, as you can see, tight fit, but my alignment tool has worked and everything's working good there. So that part is done. So I got my arm here, my lever for my throwout bearing. And of course, and this has been kind of the bane of building this car with a cheap donor, there was no seal on the side of the transmission. I knew this when I pulled the transmission apart to paint it, but completely forgot to order one. So since there's no seal right here, I'm not going to install this yet, as I want to have the seal. I got one coming from Mazda. I'll be here in a couple days. Then I'll be able to install, grease the shaft here, install the throwout bearing, and the arm. And here that I noticed in the Flyin Miata directions is they mentioned your clutch slave cylinder here to check, pull back the boot and checks for leaks. And I definitely had a lot of fluid in there. So that's a sign of your, evidently, of your slave cylinder seals going bad, and basically pretty much time for replacement, as this clutch is going to have quite a bit more pressure, it should at least, than the stock clutch. So you know, this would wear this out in short order according to Flyin Miata. So what I'm going to do is, I got a new one of these that I'm going to pick up over at Napa tomorrow, that I have waiting for me, and just go ahead and get that taken care of. I think it's around $18 for a new one of those, and so good thing just to replace while you're in there. Make sure you got it and everything's good. In a few days, but I finally got my new boot for my clutch fork, slave cylinder, and my transmission end plate arrived. So ready to get back to it. As you can see, I've already installed the boot on the transmission as well as the slave cylinder. Those are pretty straightforward installs. Next thing I'm going to be doing here is applying grease to the shaft here, the input shaft for the transmission, just a light layer of high temp grease before I throw on my throwout bearing. So greasing the input shaft here, a couple things I have seen is a lot of comments and a lot of people mentioning too much grease. And what can happen, I should say, when you apply too much grease to this shaft is the centrifugal force can basically kind of start to fling the grease off this shaft, and it can get onto your clutch. And once the clutch gets some grease on it, it can damage the clutch surface, but it can also cause it to slip quite heavily. So looking at the pictures Flyin Miata's had and some other videos, believe it or not, this is my first clutch replacement. I've had them go out and work vehicles before, but never in a personal vehicle. I've never completely worn one out before I got rid of the car. So this is the first time I've done this, and this is my main concern with this whole car, is that I am not getting too much grease on this shaft here, as I've heard that happening. So that looks like a good light amount to me. Hopefully that's the correct amount. And now it's time to slide the throw-up bearing on. Okay, so now the next step is installing our clutch fork. I'm going to apply a little bit of grease to the pivot here. Okay. And now I'm going to slide the fork through the boot here. Okay, and then try to snap this onto the pivot here. There we go. And now I will install. Actually, I shouldn't have snapped that in yet. Let me get this off here. There we go. There we go. Okay. Now insert that. Oh, let's see if I can snap it back in now. There we go. And make sure we have it on there. Yes, we do. Okay, that's installed. Now roll out here to this end of the clutch fork. It's recommended to reduce noise down the road to apply some grease to that point there. So I got my end plate here, and dummy me came over here with my clutch installed and went, whoops, that evidently is supposed to go on before everything else. So in the process of pulling my flywheel back off, already got my plate and clutch removed. Good thing is about this, I'm going to get more experience installing a clutch. Now that my moment of stupidity with the end plate is over, I got the clutch reinstalled for the second time. I'm now a professional at it. I have the transmission over here. Basically, now's time to get that input shaft aligned into the clutch and flywheel and get the two mating surfaces joined together. So, as you can see here, I have my engine. It's on the my cherry picker, and I have some blocks of wood under this side of the oil pan, a block of wood under this oil pan, and I have my transmission on a couple blocks of wood here, and it's not completely flat bottom, but fairly sturdy. Now, before I join the two together, I can see here, this is my center line of my crankshaft. I'm about an inch low here, so I'm going to try to prop these up and get this at the, I also need to jack up the back end. As you can see, the transmission's tilted slightly this way in comparison to the motor. So I need to get those mated up perfectly, and then I'm going to gently slide it into the clutch assembly and flywheel there, and then I can bolt everything back together. your transmission is mounted and you feel it actually seat on the transmission, there will still be a slight gap there. Then basically just start threading your bolts in at random ends throughout. These 3 bolts over here are the 3 starter bolts that you should have saved separately because they are a thinner diameter than the M12 by 1.5 pitch main bolts. There are 2 long bolts, basically one going here and one going with a nut on this side of the transmission, and then the rest are all the same size. I am missing one of my long ones, another wonderful gift I got from the previous owner of my car. He was missing a lot of bolts and everything, so I'm either going to have to order one of these from Mazda or I'm going to try to go to Ace today to find that. But basically, after you have these in, just a matter of going through with a torque wrench about 60 foot-pounds up to 65 foot-pounds and torquing. And you'll want to do this in kind of a random crisscross pattern. You don't want to do all of them all the way around, kind of like you would a wheel. Same kind of idea on your torque pattern on that. So we'll get to doing that. Now once you have all of your transmission bolts torqued, basically the only thing left, which I cannot demonstrate in this video because I don't have a car here to hook it up to, is hooking up your clutch lines and bleeding and checking out everything from your master cylinder to your slave cylinder and making sure your clutch adjustment is correct. So that's it for this video. Thanks you guys for watching. Hopefully this helped you guys out. Next step is basically lifting this bad boy up and getting it on the front subframe.